Hello students. Today we are here to discuss one of the environmental problems. So it's a topic of environment and ecology which is quite commonly discussed by the current affairs and the newspapers. I'm sure you have come across the term eutrophication. Now we'll discuss what eutrophication is, what are the causes of eutrophication and the consequences, the implications for the ecosystems. Let's first begin by breaking down the term eutrophication. Now this comes from the term eutrophic. And put simply, eutrophic implies well-nourished. Well-nourished, wherein eu implies to good or well and trophic refers to the nutrients or the nourishment. Eutrophication is specifically discussed in the context of aquatic ecosystems. So the aquatic ecosystems which can have the problem of eutrophication, we can have lakes, ponds, even the coastal areas in the marine ecosystems can be suffering from eutrophication, and there can be cases when the rivers as well have witnessed the problem of eutrophication. When we talk about the aquatic ecosystems, in aquatic ecosystems there are certain nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates which are called as the limiting nutrients. Nitrates and phosphates which are called as the limiting nutrients. Now, limiting nutrients, there was one of an ecologist by the name of Liebeck who gave his Liebeck's law related to the limiting nutrients or the limiting factors. I'll break it down very simply for you. Limiting nutrients or limiting factors for ecosystems are those which try to limit the primary productivity of the ecosystems, or they try to bring down the photosynthetic capacity of that ecosystem. Now, for the aquatic ecosystems such as lakes, ponds, rivers, oceans as well, we have nitrates and phosphates as very, very important examples of limiting nutrients. In case the term limiting nutrients is making some kind of confusion, a very simple way to understand this would be, think of tropical deserts. In tropical deserts such as Sahara, such as Atacama, or for that matter Thar Desert of India, the limiting factor becomes the soil moisture. So the primary productivity of these tropical deserts would have been higher had it not been for the soil moisture, or had the availability of soil moisture would have been more, the primary productivity of these tropical deserts would have been higher. So there are certain examples across the world for these ecosystems wherein some kind of factor or some kind of nutrient can act as the limiting factor or the limiting nutrient, capping the primary productivity, containing the primary productivity, limiting the primary productivity of that ecosystem, and thereby the nomenclature limiting nutrients. So nitrates and phosphates become the examples of limiting nutrients for the aquatic ecosystems. Now these limiting nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates can be made available to the aquatic ecosystems naturally, of course. So naturally when eutrophication happens, so eutrophication, eu means well nourished, eu means well, trophic means nourished. So eutrophic means well nourished, eutrophication means good amount of nourishment with these limiting nutrients. So eutrophication can happen naturally, but when it happens naturally, it happens at a gradual pace. Gradual pace in the sense, nature itself over the span of many hundreds of years can be taking up eutrophication, wherein that particular ecosystem may be undergoing its own change over time. And that process of changing of an ecosystem and the biotic communities, in case you know something about environment and ecology, is what we call as ecological succession. But ecological succession remains a matter of discussion for some other time. Right now, getting back to eutrophication. So I said eutrophication can happen through the natural mechanisms as well, through the natural factors as well. But when it happens naturally, that doesn't become an environmental concern because then it's happening naturally, so it's not an ecological challenge. The ecological challenge which is being discussed today is the eutrophication brought out by humans, caused by humans, and since it's being caused by humans, that type of eutrophication is also known as cultural eutrophication. And cultural eutrophication after Industrial Revolution has become, and after Green Revolution per se, has become so common that we don't even care to use, we don't even bother to use the term cultural to specify that it's being human induced. We often call it as eutrophication, and then it is understood that it is being referred to the process of cultural eutrophication. So human induced, human caused eutrophication would be more specifically, more aptly called as cultural eutrophication. So now whenever these water bodies, aquatic ecosystems, they are well nourished with these limiting nutrients, we call it as eutrophication. Cultural eutrophication because of human activities happens. And what type of human activities or what type of pollutants released from human sources are responsible? So the agriculture runoff will contain lot of NPK, because the agriculture runoff will contain the traces of the chemical fertilizers. Then the industrial effluents can take with them, along with them, nitrates and phosphates. Along with that, the sewage, that can have these nitrates and phosphates as well. So human-based sources of pollution responsible for cultural eutrophication are agriculture runoff, industrial effluents, and the domestic sewage. All three can become important sources of limiting nutrients of nitrates and phosphates into the water bodies. So we have understood the causes. Now let's understand how the process, once there is going to be this nutrient enrichment. So eutrophication is nutrient enrichment. So how the process progresses further for that ecosystem. Once there is nutrient enrichment, now the primary productivity of that ecosystem will shoot up. The primary productivity, I told you earlier, was getting limited because for the scarcity of nitrates and phosphates. And once we have sufficient amount of nitrates and phosphates, rather quite high amount of nitrates and phosphates being made available through all these sources, the primary productivity shoots up. The primary productivity suddenly increases. And algae, such as phytoplankton, and there are other photosynthetic organisms as well. So we have got algae doing the photosynthesis in these water bodies. We have cyanobacteria as a very, very important photosynthetic organism of these water bodies. Now their populations start to proliferate. Their population explosion starts to happen. And this proliferation of their population of the algae as well as of cyanobacteria is what we call as algal blooms. Algal blooms in the sense that we have these producers of the aquatic ecosystems blooming very rapidly, proliferating very rapidly, showing population explosion. So eutrophication is then going to result into algal blooms, and algal blooms have become a very common sight. So we go to certain rural area and there let's say is a small pond of water in proximity of the agricultural fields. We often find that the water body is covered with a green colored matty layer or a green colored scum on the surface. That green colored scum on the surface is what is an algal bloom. The algal blooms are often called as harmful algal blooms as well, because cyanobacteria can release certain toxins into this water body. When the cyanobacteria are overgrowing, they can release certain toxins into the water body. And since they end up releasing toxins, they contaminate the water body. That's why we are going to call it as harmful algal bloom. Now this harmful algal bloom, so if this is the surface of the water body and the surface is what we call as the benthic floor. The floor is what we call as benthic over here, and this is the bottom of the water body. So bottom is what we call as benthic floor, and we have the surface over here. So we have the harmful algal bloom which is going to float over the water surface. And now since this algal bloom is going to float over the water surface, there is going to be obstruction of the sunlight into the lower layers of this water body. So this algal bloom is making, at the top of the water body, is making an impenetrable layer. And because of that impenetrable layer being formed, sunlight availability into the lower layers of this water body below the surface of water, the sunlight availability isn't there. The sunlight availability gets obstructed. But understand the implications of that. Now, at the benthic surface, there are going to be certain plants which may be growing. They may have their roots, so they may be rooted over here, they may be growing over here, and they depend upon the sunlight penetrating into the water body. But if sunlight is not able to penetrate into the water body because of the algal bloom, these plants which are growing at the surface, these benthic vegetation is what we are going to refer to it as. This benthic vegetation starts dying. So photosynthesis is not happening, its body processes get compromised, and that is when this starts to die. Now as a consequence of it, the dead organic matter of the water body, that starts to increase. Moreover, this sudden proliferation of the algal blooms which had taken place, this algae eventually will die as well. Right, so now we have got lot of dead organic matter, and this quantity of dead organic matter is more than what's usually present in this water body. Right, so now we have this harmful algal bloom which is dying, and once it starts to die, and we have some other plants as well dying, once it starts to die, we have lots and lots of dead organic matter in this water body. And now the dead organic matter of this water body will undergo the process of decomposition. So decomposition starts. Now when decomposition starts, we have decomposing bacteria which will proliferate. We have decomposing bacteria which will be quite active, and this decomposing bacteria will require lot of oxygen for decomposition of the dead organic matter. Now the oxygen which is being demanded by this decomposing bacteria for breakdown of the dead organic matter, chemical breakdown of the dead organic matter, and its process of biological process of respiration as well, the amount of oxygen which is needed by the decomposing bacteria will be called as biological oxygen demand, which is abbreviated as BOD. So we call it as BOD, biological oxygen demand. So the oxygen being demanded is what we are calling as the biological oxygen demand. And being demanded by whom? Being demanded by the decomposing bacteria. But why do we have overgrowth of decomposing bacteria? Because the amount of dead organic matter is more than the average. And the oxygen which is supplied in this water body, that is what is available in the water body, is dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen levels had started to fall down once we had the harmful algal bloom, because please understand that once we have the harmful algal bloom which is floating on the surface of the water body, now we can have less of oxygen from the atmosphere replenishing the oxygen of this water body. So the oxygen replenishment of the water body from the atmosphere, that gets stopped as well once we have the harmful algal bloom. So DO had already started to come down, and that decline in the value of DO also became one of the factors contributing to the dying of the benthic vegetation. So DO was falling down initially as well because of the harmful algal bloom, but now once we have lots and lots of decomposing bacteria, the decomposing bacteria is going to first consume this dissolved oxygen, and then the dissolved oxygen, that comes down again. Further it comes down. So dissolved oxygen, once it starts to become less than 5 milligram per liter, we can call it as a hypoxic water body. Though there are certain books which say that hypoxic water body is what we are going to call it as once it becomes less than 2 milligram per liter. But less than 5 milligram per liter is going to create a hypoxic condition wherein it becomes very difficult for the bigger life forms like fishes, etc. to survive. Consequently, the bigger organisms, aquatic organisms like fishes, etc., they start choking to death. And now once they start choking to death, understand what's happening. The process will magnify. What process? We have more of dead organic matter. So once we have this DO becoming less than 5 milligram per liter, the bigger organisms start choking to death, we have more of dead organic matter, we will have more of decomposition happening, the BOD increases further, the dissolved oxygen decreases further. And then eventually this process continues till a stage when dissolved oxygen can become completely zero. So we had the hypoxic conditions earlier, but now from the hypoxic conditions of less oxygen, it ultimately ends up becoming anoxic. Anoxic as in without any oxygen. And once there is zero oxygen, now of course without any oxygen, it's a dead system. It's no more an ecosystem. It's a dead zone. It's a dead zone. Dead zone wherein earlier there was life, but now the life has collapsed because of the process of cultural eutrophication caused by humans. So eutrophication is a major environmental concern associated with the aquatic ecosystems. For example, one of the hotspots of cultural eutrophication remains Gulf of Mexico. There is a lot of agriculture runoff which happens from the Mississippi River basin into the Gulf of Mexico. Similarly, if you think about the Bay of Bengal region of India, the coastal waters of Bay of Bengal, since over the coast of our country, there can be multiple sources causing cultural eutrophication of those waters. We often come across the news articles related to or episodes of eutrophication happening over there. And of course, the long-term solution of eutrophication lies in the sustainable use of these chemical-based inputs into agriculture. At the same time, whatever sewage we have, whatever industrial effluents we have, those also require some kind of scientific treatment so that we don't irresponsibly dispose of these agricultural runoff or the industrial effluents or the sewage into our water bodies, which is then going to impact the aquatic life in a considerable manner, resulting into dead zones. So that's about eutrophication from my side. I hope the video helped you. All the very best for your preparation. Thank you.